Hey, what's going on? I am just getting started on book. Sorry, I'm trying to get this. Word. Hey, what's going on? X stream ready. All right, live, Facebook Live. YouTube, live, Twitch, Kick Live, Twitch, Live. Okay. I'm gonna try to do this thing where I'm get this stream with a buddy of mine. Let me see if this works. Hold on a second. Let me turn this down. What is up? What is up? Gabriel Rathwig here. And invite guest Dominic. Send invite. Never mind. I don't even know how to fucking do this. It's stupid as shit. Disregard that last, buddy. I don't know how to do it. Anyway, I am Gabriel Rathwig, author of From Chef to Crafter to Conqueror, I Am Gamer, many other Warrior Academy, Earth Online, other titles. And today we are on the 11th day. This is loud. The 11th day. There we go. The 11th day of writing a book From Chef to Crafter to Conqueror. As you can see here, we're at 30,068 words. My books are all about 100,000 words. So, I have to write 3,500 words today to finish by the end of the month. How does that work? Every 1,000 words is 1%. 100% of this book being done is 100,000 words. We're at 30% right now. Since there's 20 days left in the month, I have to write 70,000 words. And to break that down, that needs 3,500 words per day for the rest of the month to finish. And that's just the first draft. So then we still have the second draft, the rewrites and stuff, which will be the next 2 weeks after the month. But technically, it is finishing a book in 1 month. I really didn't want to write today. It's just one of those days I can't focus. I've been trying to think about what to write, and it's just really not coming together. So I said, screw it. Let's just write. You know, I got to. Sometimes you just got to do it. And today we're doing that. Okay, so normally it's 500 words per half hour, 1,000 words an hour, the goal, but I probably am not going to go as fast as that because I just don't feel like writing. So I'm going to try to, but we'll see. It's 2 o'clock. Going to that pace, I'll be done around 5:30, 3,500 words would be 3.5 hours. So I'll probably finish in about 3 hours. I don't know. We'll see if I get there. I'm at 30,000, so 33.5 is the goal. Tip for the day, just keep slogging away. Some days you don't want to. So some days you just don't want to, so you just got to do it. It's just like any other job. All right, go back to the first stream of the month, 9/1, and that gives a full recap of books 1 through 5 of From Chef to Crafter to Conqueror. And yeah. Okay, so I think I'm gonna do something different today. I really don't feel like writing, so what I'm going to do is watch something on YouTube while I write. And it's gonna be something boring that I can kind of just pay a little bit of attention to, which is aliens.
You know, a lot of people I interview have
I'll put
had
that
fleeting
on
interactions in one-off
here.
instances. You know, they've been abducted by
And
the Bray,
anybody
where
that
they've,
so
you know,
chooses
interacted with a
can
tall
watch
white or a
Aliens
Nordic. You've
while
had
I write.
years of interactions
I'll do a quick
with all three, but
check of the follow check chats, see if anybody's watching. Any questions? Looks like 2 of you folks are on Kick as usual. What's up? A singular on Twitch. Hello. YouTube. Nada. No sabe nada. YouTube. And nobody on Facebook. X. You know. Who knows? I don't even know how to check it. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So, let us get on with the writing. You can read here. I'll take my time. I'm not going to be reading it today because I'm going to be listening to the podcast. But it is 2 hours and 20 minutes. Hopefully, I can get a couple thousand words in 2 hours and 20 minutes while watching a podcast. We'll see. Yeah. 1 second. Hold on. I got a message. Hold up. Let's see who it is. Okay, listened. Let me see something real quick. I need to close this monitor real quick. I need to look up something on. There is something happening. 1 second. I think there is. Hold on. Sorry, I know I should be talking. I'm just trying to find something. My friend sent me a message. I just need to check a thing. I don't know what he's talking about. Huh. Yeah, I know I'm so boring right now, guys. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure this out. Like, there's supposed to be some kind of con that my friend's telling me about, but I have no idea what he's talking about. And I really don't see it anywhere. I'll just talk to him after because I have no idea what he means. Huh. I really don't know what he's talking about. Well, I guess, hey, give me like 1 minute. Let me just message my friend back. I know it's so shitty of me to start the stream and not, but like, 1 minute, 1 minute. Bro, I have no idea what you're talking about. Send me link to a website or something, or like the whatever. Because I can't find what you're talking about. Drama, son. Okay. So today, even though you don't want to work, you work, and today I'm going to work, and we're gonna do it by watching some aliens while writing about the Philippines, which we'll watch at some point during this podcast when I get bored of listening about aliens and can't think of what to write. And yeah, this is part of my process too. So if anybody has any questions, nobody's in the chat to ask. Okay, here we go.
but mostly with the tall whites.
Tall whites.
There was this giant white radioactive horse that floated around the ranges at night and was fluorescent. The extraterrestrials, when they come, even if they're your good friends, there's always a tension because they always come heavily armed.
Today's amazing guest on American Alchemy has seen the inside of a UFO. He's a first-hand witness to the collaboration between human beings and aliens from another world. He's even made an alien laugh. Charles Hall was in the Air Force. He was also stationed at the notorious Area 51. While stationed there, he was in regular contact with an alien race that he calls the Tall Whites for 2 years. This conversation is absolutely wild.
There's a guy at NASA who has a deep interest in these sorts of things, experiencers. His name is Timothy Taylor. Have you heard of him by any chance?
Did you say Timothy Taylor?
Yeah.
Oh, he's a good friend of ours.
We're going to be talking about aliens going to the bathroom, what powers a UFO, and theories of subatomic physics that overturn Einstein. Before we get into it, I want to introduce our guest, Charles Hall. Hall enlisted in the U.S. Air Force in 1964 when he was just 19 years old. He trained as a weather observer, measuring wind speeds, cloud cover, and visibility. From 1965 to 1967, he was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. His job included long, isolated tours at the Indian Springs gunnery ranges. He was out in the desert doing routine weather observations when he started noticing strange figures. Tall, pale, glowing shapes moving at a distance. At first, he thought they were ghosts, or maybe hallucinations brought on by solitude. Other observers had similar experiences. They called it the legend of Range 4 Harry, a ghostly radioactive horse roaming the desert. One observer was even injured in an encounter with something and given a medical discharge. Others flat out refused to return to the post. But Hall was very different. Something about who he was meant that he wasn't going to break like the others had, and both his commanders and these tall white beings seemed to take notice. In this isolated crucible, he began slowly interacting with the tall whites. These beings would stalk him and test him, appear suddenly and vanish, slowly gauging his reactions. But he eventually learned this unwritten language, and although there were some painful setbacks, he gradually developed a trust. He saw family groups, parents, children, elders. He would even end up referring to one of them as something like a brother. Hall claims that the tall whites lived in underground facilities at the north end of Indian Springs Valley, complete with hangars for their craft, a story bearing striking resemblance to that of Bob Lazar. He learned about their different flying crafts, and as you'll see in our conversation, what he saw comports with much of what we've learned about UAPs since 2017. But the tall whites were not the only alien race described in this story. Hall has talked about the Greys, the small, frail, large-headed humanoids that match the classic Roswell image.
The tall white technology was better than the technology of the Greys, but the Greys come from a planet that's closer than the planet the tall whites come from, and the Greys got here first.
And then there are the Nordics, what you'll hear Hall refer to as the Norwegians with the 24 teeth. Hall described them as more patient, more diplomatic, even benevolent compared to the tall whites. Some of them could pass among humans in the public, sometimes blending into crowds. There is no end to the speculation about how these alien species, who Hall suggests have been here for thousands of years, might have interacted with humanity's evolution or social development. If all of this sounds crazy, well, yeah, I don't blame you. And trust me, we've only scratched the surface here. I personally don't even know what to make about this conversation. There are things Charles Hall is about to say that feel beyond the pale to me. So that's my primer for you. Without further ado, please welcome this week's amazing American alchemist, Charles Hall.
Today's episode is sponsored by Incogni.
Before we dive into today's episode of American Alchemy, I want to give a quick shout out to our amazing sponsor, Incogni. This is a service that I use to make all of my personal information vanish from the sketchiest corners of the internet. Let's get back into this crazy episode.
Skip the commercial.
I'm here with Charles Hall. It's an honor to have you. It's been a long time coming. You're the subject of an amazing documentary by Emil Marzak called Walking with the Tall Whites. But you've also written a series of amazing books called Millennial Hospitality. You have 6 volumes.
There's 6 volumes.
You have 6 volumes at this point, and you've interacted with, a lot of people I interview have had fleeting interactions in one-off instances. They've been abducted by a gray, or they've, interacted with a tall white or a Nordic. You've had years of interactions with all 3, but mostly with the tall whites, and I really want to dive into that. But first, I want to talk about your Hall photon theory. You believe that Einstein is wrong and has limited physics, stagnated it for the last century. And so let's get into that.
I'm quite certain Einstein was wrong. And I've also written books entitled Beyond Relativity, and I've done a Rumble video entitled Mirage Galaxies and Edges in Space. Edges is spelled with capital letters because it's a zone. And I've also done a second film with Emil Marzak, which discusses that, called Walking with the Tall Whites Aftermath. And I've also, that's all copyrighted, Hall photon theory. I first copyrighted Hall photon theory in 1997, and I'm quite certain that there are many more particles, subatomic particles, and many more types of force fields which exist in the real world. And that's why relativity is not correct, because relativity doesn't take those into account.
And for context for the audience, you are extremely smart. You have a master's degree in nuclear physics, and you scored off the charts on one of these math tests before joining the Army. And so
I was in the Air Force, and what you say is correct. I got 1 wrong out of 500 on the Air Force math ability test. It was the one I was marking as I was marking the correct answer as the clock had sounded, and they were ripping the answer sheet from my cold hands. If they'd just given me 10 more seconds, I'd have got them all.
That's amazing. But you told me off air that what inspired this Hall photon theory was you actually seeing a craft and realizing it could go faster than light. So you were stationed at Area 51.
That's correct. Well, I was a weather observer in the U.S. Air Force, and I was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base from March of 1965 until May of 1967. And Nellis is in charge of the gunnery ranges at Indian Springs, and I was a duty weather observer at Indian Springs. Area 51 is just in the 1965 was just the entry area to the areas, and the areas went up to number 60, and I've been in all of them. The areas were assembled into lands. The most famous land was Dreamland. Area 51 was not actually Dreamland itself, it was merely Groom Lake. Dreamland was Area 53 and 54, which was the northern half of Indian Springs Valley, and then the valley to the east, Dogbone Valley, and part of the valley to the west, including French Peak. The biggest shock was not that extraterrestrials were here on Earth and had been ever since at least the Ice Age. The biggest shock that I felt was discovering that Einstein was wrong about relativity. The craft that the tall whites and the grays came in, the Roswell grays came in, could easily exceed the speed of light by many times. The tall white technology was better than the technology of the grays, but the grays come from a planet that's closer than the planet the tall whites come from, and the grays got here first. So I would guess that 90% of the time that you see an actual extraterrestrial craft, it's one of the gray craft, and about 10% of the time it's one of the tall white craft. And the grays are much more numerous for that reason. I remember the shock when I really, truly understood that Einstein was wrong about relativity. I was out at Range 3 and as the duty weather observer.
What year is this?
And this was in the mid-1960s. This was like in 1965, the late summer. And there was a 6-week or 2-month period where I was certain that the tall white individuals who identified themselves as the teacher and Range 4 Harry and tour guide, who were my good friends, that they had taken a vacation or a business trip somewhere and that they weren't on this planet and that they had gone to some other inhabited planet orbiting some other star. A reasonable guess would have been the star Arcturus or a star near Arcturus. Then they came back. I believed they'd been on a business trip / vacation type trip. Now Arcturus is 36 light years away, and the nearest star, Alpha Centauri, is almost 4 light years away. It's a group of 3 stars. And to go anywhere and come back to another star, the craft you were on had to travel quite a few times faster than the speed of light, like 44 times or something minimum, just to go there and come back in 2 months.
I think a lot of people in the audience might hear that they're coming back and forth from, a star system that is 36 light years away and want to know some core details as to what you are seeing. Mm-hmm. Do you see crafts coming in, and what did the crafts look like?
On the night of the full moon, mm-hmm. or a few days before or a few days after. But their base at the north end of Indian Springs, they were using Dogbone Lake as their landing field.
What do the crafts look like?
Like Tic Tacs.
Like Tic Tacs?
Yeah, like eggs, like white eggs. They were egg-shaped.
Are they of the kind of, David Fravor, 2004, the Nimitz sighting, where you have a Tic Tac? Or was it like the egg that Jake Barber or, Socorro, New Mexico, 64, those are two different shapes, or both shapes?
When I first saw them, it reminded me the most of like a large version of the engine of a passenger train, only with everything rounded like an egg. There were no sharp edges, no sharp protrusions, just smooth and round like a round. It was ellipsoidal, okay?
Any hieroglyphics or symbols?
Not on the outside. When you went on, their writing is hieroglyphics, more so. Their writing, if you didn't know Egyptian hieroglyphics, a couple of the guys that were with me who had seen them thought that they were ancient Egyptians who had somehow or another gotten into Indian Springs Valley and trapped there, and were still using their own hieroglyphics.
Who thought that?
A couple of the other range men, yeah.
Interesting.
And they can stand right there in front of you. I speak from direct experience. And if they feel like talking to each other using sounds too high for a human to hear, they'll do so. And if you didn't know better, you'd think they were able to do telepathy, because they'll be sitting there in total silence and one will laugh, and then they'll be going through a complete conversation. And of course, their electronics also are able to tell what a person is thinking and to put thoughts in the conscious part of their mind by electronic means.
Why do you think that?
From direct experience. Okay.
Did they have a device that could implant thoughts?
Yeah, only it wasn't a big device that they had to carry in their hands. It was one that they'd carry like on a helmet or whatever,
And what's the broader context here? Are you sort of this rogue Air Force rangeman, or do the other rangemen and superiors, are they aware of this ET presence coexisting alongside you guys at this testing complex? And is it sort of there's just this kind of awareness that there's this cohabitation there?
The Pentagon had a tiny handful of people that that interacted with them. The range maintenance men, a few knew they were there, but most of them just knew about the legend of Range 4 Harry. The legend of Range 4 Harry was that there was this giant white radioactive horse that floated around the ranges at night and was fluorescent, and supposedly was a horse that had gotten too close to the bomb blast at Yucca Flats, and you'd see him on warm summer nights from a distance, and you could stay, but you needed to stay away from him. And he was called Range 4 Harry. Now, there was an actual tall white guy with the name Range 4 Harry. And the tall whites, when they were wearing their protective suits, could form up into a high-speed horse formation. Like if there were, a typical one is if there were 2 women, a couple, 3 kids, children, and 2 men, the 2 women would be in front and bend over at the waist and bend forward and put their arms out like that, some usually, and they would be the front of the horse. And then the 3 children would, remember their suits, the technology of them allowed them to float 9 or 10 inches off the ground. They could float a lot higher if they wanted to, but they had to balance themselves. And the children would float, whose suits were a slightly different design, would float higher so that they were floating at about the waist level. So you'd have the 2 women in front and the 3 children. Then at the back, you'd have the 2 men who had bigger suits and more powerful packs, and they would bend over the children. So if you saw them when they were out in the desert, say a quarter mile away, when they all turned on their suits, the force fields from around those suits merged into one. And I speak from direct experience. You would swear there was a giant white floating horse coming at you from out in the desert. Now, that horse could, when they were in that formation, the reason I call it the high-speed horse formation is because I personally watched them when they wanted to go somewhere when they were out hiking, say and they wanted to go somewhere fast, they could form up into that formation, and they could reach speeds of 100 miles an hour over the desert by floating up above the ground and just going zoom. I used to watch them play at the runways at Indian Springs Air Base on summer nights, as the way tobogganists did, where they would pretend they were airplanes taking off, and then when they got to the end, they would lift up and go over the fence around the runway and go out in the desert and turn around and pretend they were airplanes doing touch and goes.
Why do you think they were allowed to operate independently on kind of American military grounds? So the superiors were kind of
the
unaware,
base for them was like a foreign embassy. And they've been here since the Ice Age.
Do you think it was the nuclear testing that created some sort of Wheeler Tunnel or something that they traveled through? Or why there? Why do you think they set up shop there?
I'm certain that the Greys got here first and they were here before the last Ice Age, and that the Tall Whites got here second and they were here by at least the middle of the last Ice Age. And the Norwegians with 24 teeth got here towards the end of the last Ice Age. The Tall Whites have the best technology. The Greys have really good technology. The Norwegians are just barely able to travel in space and make it here. When you look at the bases and where the Tall Whites and the Greys are, you have to look at the way they were in the Ice Age. There's a place out in the deserts that I was in. It's out in one of the most desolate sections of the western deserts that you can imagine. There's a L-shaped valley with mountains desert mountains on both sides, and then there's a valley on the northern side. But in the southern side, the valley is an L-shaped valley, and there's a dry lake bed, a small dry lake bed on the southern side, and a huge amphitheater type set of ground that the Greys farmed during the Ice Age. And in the mountain on the west, they'd cut 13 tunnels in the mountain on the west, and they used them as a granary. And the one on the north, the first one on the north, was larger than the others, and it was large enough for their deep spacecraft to come in and pick up grain. And the 13th one overlooked the fields, and when at the top of the L-shaped valley and at the bottom of the L-shaped valley, the mountains form a constriction. So if you were a gray teenager with a appropriate weapon and you were sitting there, you could monitor both entrances. And so if any Ice Age animals came in to eat the grain, because they're plant eaters, the tall whites and the grays do not eat meat, they're only plant eaters, you could keep them out and keep them from eating your food. And when you asked, and when you looked at the valley on the west, you could see the ancient water lines from how high the lake had been during different stages of the Ice Age. Now, central Nevada was never glaciated. It was just that in the Ice Age, because the weather was different, it rained lots and lots, like it does in Kentucky. And so those lake beds were not glacial lakes. They weren't glacial carved. They were pluvial lakes, the Latin word for rain. And therefore, those lake beds were flat, and the land leading into them were perfect places to farm. And what you were looking at was a granary, a farm that the Greys used during the Ice Age.
So it sounds like there are all these unique reasons as to why, as an extraterrestrial presence, you'd set up shop in that area.
This is a really interesting point. Something I kept coming back to while preparing for this conversation was this strange possibility of, what if Area 51's weirdness didn't start because it's a military base? What if the base was put there because of a pre-existing weirdness in the region? As Charles points out, the broader pattern is hard to ignore. Many of the most restricted military ranges and test sites sit in the same kind of landscapes: remote deserts, mountain valleys, and high plains, and sometimes Native American burial grounds. Sure, there are practical reasons for this when it comes to testing weapons and spy planes, but often these places were tied up in UFO sightings, cryptid creatures, electromagnetic anomalies, before military bases were even placed on them. Many were even seen to be portals to other dimensions. Maybe it isn't just a coincidence. Maybe the military wasn't just picking up empty land, but claiming ground that was very unusual. To put it bluntly, maybe military bases often like to co-locate themselves with very strange paranormal areas. Skinwalker Ranch in northeastern Utah is perhaps the most public example. I've been there myself, and you've no doubt heard the stories. It's probably the most scientifically studied paranormal hotspot in the world, at least on the civil side. Multiple UFO sightings, glowing orbs, cattle mutilations, and even reports of orange portals opening up in the air. But it also has its former military connections. There was a US Army outpost in the region in the 19th century, and today it sits not far from Dugway Proving Grounds. In the 2000s, billionaire and government contractor Robert Bigelow received Pentagon funding through the OSAP program to research the ranch. Why, you might ask? Well, folklore from the Utah tribe had already marked the land as cursed, prowled by shapeshifters. That was long before the Pentagon made it a research site. And if you zoom out, the geography is interesting too. You can draw a rough triangle between Area 51, Skinwalker Ranch, and Roswell. Other paranormal hotspots with co-located military activity exist all over the United States. For example, Sedona, Arizona. Local legends speak of tunnels and gateways hidden in the cliffs, where star people pass through shimmering portals. The Bradshaw Ranch there became famous for UFO sightings, investigated not long ago by Ross Coulthard. Eventually, the site was taken over by the US government, a move that raised some eyebrows. Why seize a random rural property in Arizona unless there was something they felt needed securing? To this day, locals still report black helicopters circling overhead and interference with drones near the area. It fits the pattern. Land fenced off not just for practical reasons, but because of whatever it is said to be in the land itself. Land that seems full of electromagnetic anomalies, and perhaps the same tunnels in land that are occupied by the tall whites. And that brings us back to Nevada. It's easy to forget that Area 51 isn't just one base. It's part of a vast test range anchored by Nellis, swallowing up thousands of square miles of desert. Charles gets into this in just a moment, but the history of how this whole area ended up getting claimed by the government doesn't quite add up, especially when it became a herd of desert sheep, suddenly becoming an issue of national security. And it begs the very important question: how much of this pattern extends overseas? Look at where the United States has planted some of its overseas bases. Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, Pine Gap in outback Australia, sprawling compounds in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of these sites already had their own unusual reputations amongst locals, or maybe some other uses to our alien visitors from out of town.
Do you think it's a coincidence then that you get Area 51 and some of the most top secret advanced R&D when it comes to the American military co-located on that area?
I subscribe to the Marine Corps theory. If it happened once, it would be a coincidence. If it happened twice, if it was happened once, it would be random. If it happened twice, it would be a coincidence. But the third time you see it's there, somebody planned it. Okay? Yeah. Now, remember what else is out there. The Desert Game Range National Park. Okay? Now, the Desert Game Range was set up in the time of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Okay? It was I talk about in my book, and it was like 1935 or 1937. For some reason, FDR just got up all by himself, and after talking with a single Army colonel, Army Air Force colonel, decided that the desert bighorn sheep who live in the mountains like Sheep Peak, for which it's named, and the mountains to the east, must be an endangered species. You say, wait a minute, this is 1937. I didn't realize we had endangered species till 1970 or something. No, this was 1937, and by executive order said, we got to make that a protected area to protect the desert bighorn sheep. They're white, and if you're out there hiking and you see something, in the words of the park rangers, that looks like a human looking at you from over the sagebrush, which may be as tall as 6 feet, don't look back, especially if it looks like a woman with children, because the bighorn sheep don't like that. They'll attack you. Just look away and walk away. And in 1937, in order to protect the sheep, and that we're talking before World War II, Franklin Roosevelt and the Army Air Force decided that they would station a battalion of anti-aircraft guns with live ammo to protect it, okay? So in case so it wouldn't be subject to Japanese air attack.
And it was all that specific area?
In that specific area, right? And that was the desert before there was an Area 51, before there was a Nellis gunnery range, before there was a Camp Mercury or anything, there was the Desert Southwest Game Range.
So that's the first time
And you
there.
say that, so the sheep are being protected by anti-aircraft crews that have live ammo, and they're open to fire at any airplane that goes across there in 1937. And FDR just said, well, I want the sheep to be safe, and that's why it's called Sheep Peak.
Wow.
And you say, when you look at it, Sheep Peak seems like a pretty easy place to climb. Why is it that the first time, it is a matter of record, that it was climbed, that anyone climbed it, was 1970. Okay, you say, well, wait a minute, we did we did Mount Everest before that, right? Yeah,
Well, it sounds like, protecting sheep with, anti-aircraft technology, the most advanced at the time. seems a little-
it seems like if you'd fire a few live rounds, wouldn't you kind of scare them
Right.
a little bit, right? Yeah,
So based on your rule, if it's like, fool me once,
yeah,
okay, fool me twice, fine. Fool me
Yeah.
3 times, that's sort of a, that's not a coincidence anymore.
yeah.
What's the second time? Is there a second time before Area 51, which gets set up in the 50s, that suspicious military or covert activity occurs in the region that might have to do with the ET presence?
Well, remember how good their technology is. The technology of the whites and the technology of the grays. And I do not exaggerate. I speak from direct experience. When you say if they came here in the Ice Age, and and they're plant eaters, and in order to get a little help with harvesting grain and doing manual labor and things like that, there's nobody out in Nevada. Where would they get that from? Remember how good their technology is. And I speak from direct experience. If they wanted to use the scout craft, which is, the tall white scout craft or the gray scout craft, both of which I've personally seen, and in the time I've been talking, if they wanted to, say, lift off from the backyard and go to the moon and circumnavigate the moon to check up on what's going on the far side of the moon and return and land in the backyard right here, they would have already done so. That's how good their technology is. One of the things I personally watched them do from a distance, because if you get too close, the fields will burn you like a microwave, but like from a distance of, say, like 2.5, 3 miles, was to go onto the scout craft and sit down in the seats, no seat belts or anything, just chairs like this, and power up the, not the outer coils, but just the bottom and control coils, and lift off until they were floating perhaps as far off the desert or above the sagebrush as the height the camera is, and then take a few seconds, like 30 seconds, to power up completely the outer coils. It takes a few seconds to do so. When they do so, before they do so, the craft looks the way you're expecting. If you saw a helicopter out there, you'd see the actual metal of the helicopter. But after they've powered up, they just look real fuzzy white, like a tic-tac, because they're surrounded with force fields. You no longer see the actual metal, you just see the force field and the way it's fuzzing over light and interacting with it. Once they're powered up, they're ready for high-speed maneuvers.
Let's get into
If they choose to go straight down the line of sight, they can go 7 miles at an average speed of 8,000 to 12,000 miles an hour, stop, power down, and set down. And in the process, they would have taken more than 15,000 Gs starting and 15,000 Gs stopping, just sitting there in the room like this. And in case you're wondering how much that is, 10,000 Gs will liquefy steel.
is the speed of light is like 86,000 miles per hour?
186,000
186,000, okay.
miles per second.
Miles per second.
And they can do,
So if they're going 8 to 10,000 miles per hour, there's still massive difference between that and
they're not even in low
speed of light.
gear. They're not even in low gear.
Yeah, not even in low gear. Wow.
If they do that and they choose to go sideways, they'll just seem to blink out. You'll be looking there and they'll just seem to disappear before your eyes, because they will have accelerated and moved to the side so fast your eyes can't follow. I speak from direct experience. And if you're looking up and straight up Indian Springs Valley and they choose to pop over to Dogbone Valley and come down and then come in one of the northern passes to see what you're doing, it'll look like they just blinked out there and magically reappeared over there less than a second or two later if they were in the hands of a skilled pilot. A lot of people who still believe in Einstein will mistakenly say they went to another dimension. Really, they haven't. They've done it. If you were in the way, it would run. The craft would run into you. There is no such thing as wormholes or warping space and time. What you're warping isn't space and time. You're interacting with other force fields that are all matter has, and the same way that you might have an electric field of different shapes or a magnetic field of different shapes. But time never slows down. Time never runs in reverse. Time is just time. It always goes forward.
Have you ever flown in a craft?
Yes, yeah. A couple of times I did.
What was that like?
Well, I was in the cargo hold at the time because there was, as I describe in my books, the day after I thought I'd broken my kneecap and then it healed up, there was the next morning when they came down to get me and take me up to their base up at Area 53 to see if I needed a surgery on my knee.
And was it the tall whites?
Yeah, and when I got up there, the American generals were there and medical people were up there too, and I didn't. I just bruised it, but they had to the tall whites had to prove to the Americans that they were telling them the correct or wanted to prove that. And so they came down and grabbed me and put me in the hold of the cargo shop. And I still remember the trip up there and the trip back.
Where did they go? Did you leave?
No, they just lifted off, and we just went gently up the valley, perhaps 100 feet off the ground. And I remember flying around Range 4, so I made the turn around Range 4, and then going up the valley they were going to the scout craft, the back entrance to their scout craft hangar. And the door was open, and we went in there, and then there was a whole bunch of them in there, but there were also an American general and some American medical people, and the 6 sergeants that was chief master sergeants that were the human guards for the human generals, and the teacher and Range 4 Harry. And it was just like sitting here in a chair, only in the cargo hold. And they didn't totally power up because they didn't have to. And it was like sitting here in the chair and having the whole room just be lifted up and taken and come back. And it was remarkably unremarkable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The important part was that they thought they'd electronically hypnotize me, but their equipment doesn't work if you're sick or if you're angry or if you're really tired. And since even though my knee was not broken, I was still experiencing some pain, it was still tender. It meant that the way my thoughts, the blood flow in the brain was somewhat different than the way it would normally be. And so therefore, when you use the electronic hypnotism on me, that would normally have worked when I was ordinary, if I was healthy and well rested, it didn't quite do the job.
It's almost like anesthesia that doesn't work during surgery or something.
Yeah.
You're still awake. So
Yeah.
speaking of...
So I got to remember it.
Yeah.
Range 4 Harry knew that was the case, but that was all he could do, yeah.
Why do you think they chose you for all of this? Why do you think you were sort of picked to be endowed with this knowledge?
One time I asked a different person who was one of the top, identified himself as one of the top 3 psychiatrists at the CIA. One of the time I asked him why they chose me. Okay? Because I said I thought there were lots of men that were better at going out in the desert and surviving and fixing trucks and so on than myself. A lot of weather observers with more experience and so on than me. And he told me the following. He said that, and he had like 9 PhDs hanging on the wall for different facets of psychiatry. And he was a very nice guy. He was surprisingly young, like in his 30s. He said that when he studied psychiatry, he was told that there was 105 different psychological defenses that humans might use. The most famous is whistling in the dark. Okay? He said that most humans only use one or two at the most. That one of the projects that he and the others usually did was trying to train colonels and generals on how to have more psychological defenses. They were hoping to get generals to use 3, or they always wanted them to use 3. They were hoping they could get them to use 4 or 5. This is of the 105. And he said that he had told the other guys that were with him, psychiatrists, that there were some generals he was trying to train. He thought he was going to get them to learn 7, and he couldn't. They were going to hang in there at 3. He said that the first time he met me, he was shocked because in the first 15 minutes, he saw me use the first 70 out of the 105. And he was certain I could use the remainder of the 105. And you can see it in my books. He said the 41 men that went out before me, who all came back compromised and some of them burned, he said the problem they had, in his opinion, was that they recognized what they were up against, or something of what they were up against, before they understood how they were going to had decided how they were going to react. Okay? And he said that and therefore what happened was, in just the first encounter, their psychological defenses got destroyed. And he said that the reason they sent me, he said if there ever was a person to send, it would be you. He said it's because they'll never lay a glove on you. They'll never, that no matter what happens, you have a defense for it. Okay?
And they had evaluated that prior to sending you out to commune with the ET.
Yeah. They have and you can see it in there. There was a time when I thought that the extraterrestrial lady I was looking at, that I was hallucinating. And I was kind of surprised because I was kind of thinking that if I was going to hallucinate, I was alone out in the desert, I was young and single, that if I was going to hallucinate, that it would be more like a Las Vegas showgirl. And she wasn't, And I thought, my God, how sick am I? I'm not even, see?
Huh.
And she was laughing, because she could tell what I was thinking because of her electronic equipment, you see? See, and there was a time when I thought that I must be short on vitamins when they would come into my barracks at Indian Springs, and I would get up and I would see the children playing, and I thought, golly, I knew I should have drank more milk for supper. I must be short on vitamins and milk, and so I would take more vitamins, and they would still keep coming. There was a time when
But you're also debriefing with generals who are admitting that this is a phenomena that they're aware of, and that they're kind of working alongside these ETs. Is that right?
No, I'm never debriefed.
You're never debriefed?
I'm never briefed. I'm never debriefed.
But aren't you
Not
talking
only
to the
that's not
generals
an
about-
accent. My orders are, I can never be briefed. I can never be debriefed. And the reason is very simple. Because the tall whites, like the teacher, can tell what a person is thinking, even if they're not talking. Well, if you're debriefed and they're very touchy about their children, if a briefing person were to say, what kind of mother is the teacher? How does she treat her little girl? I mean, she was lost in the sagebrush and you saved her life. How did they let that happen? See, then they wouldn't have to ask me to tell them about it. See, they could tell it by just reading my thoughts. The next thing they would demand is that somebody, like that officer, be delivered to them out in the desert, and he wouldn't live another moment, okay? Yeah, and I wouldn't have to say anything or do anything or say else, because she could just tell, oh yeah, I read Charlie and I see that happened. So when I say that no one could ever ask me questions, I could never be debriefed, Nothing I would do would ever be classified. Like no one could, they couldn't even inspect me. If they wanted to talk to me, they physically had to come out to the parking lot of the chow hall at Indian Springs between noon and 12:30, and I would meet them there if I felt like meeting them, or if I didn't, then they would just, and before they went out, they would have to check in with the base commander at Nellis, and when they came back, they had to go directly from checking on base to the base commander and say, yeah, I looked healthy and so on. And they couldn't come out and inspect my barracks or see anything.
Have you mentioned the CIA psychiatrist who said that you had all these psychological defenses, and that sort of allowed you to enter into relations with the ETs?
It allowed me
and come back intact.
No, it allowed me to protect my thoughts, the person I am, before admitting to myself they are real and I know what I'm going to do.
Have you ever heard the name Kit Green? Is that familiar to you at all?
Doesn't ring a bell, but I probably heard him. But like the first thing the first agreement I made with them was, after realizing they were real, that I asked them that whenever they came around me, that they talk between themselves, if they were talking between themselves or with me in a way that I could hear, to speak English, because it frightened me if they were talking between themselves, and it sometimes sounded like horse whinnies or bird calls. And they agreed. And then the second one was that if I saw them out in the desert, like if I came over a rise and there was one sitting on a rock, I understood that it was easy for me to sneak up on him, behind him, and surprise him, and I didn't want to do that. I would just stop where I was and stand where I was and sing a song and let them know I was there. And then if they wanted to come closer, I would just stand there and they could walk up towards me and stop whenever they wanted to. I wouldn't pursue, I wouldn't close the gap. And if they got too close to me so that I started feeling intimidated, I would start backing away and they would stop. And then when we had decided how far apart we were going to be physically, then we could communicate.
Your wife, Marie-Therese, mentioned that you actually were sent out initially.
Initially, I was supposed to go after doing my basic training at Lackland. Then I was put in PAT standing. That was airmen waiting their security clearance, okay? And those airmen that were going to get a security clearance and be sent to San Angels, Texas for Security School 101 were supposed to wait there for like 3 weeks or so, okay? Now, the security clearance you're waiting for is whatever the government decides to give you, but it's supposed to be the top secret clearance, okay? Now, the security training, the people who are sent to San Angels, Texas, are waiting to get their orders to San Angels, Texas. However, in my case, they issue 2 sets of orders. The real ones to San Angels, Texas, and the cover orders to the Weather Training School at Chinook Air Force Base, Illinois. The idea is that the captain, who is in charge of those guys, who has a safe for classified material that's locked, this is 1965, times have all changed since then, he's the one that will give out my orders. The day sergeant can give out all the rest of the orders. Okay? Yeah, because because my clearance is going to be a higher clearance than theirs. Well, the Friday that they came in, the captain is off playing golf. Now, as a military officer, he's supposed to be on duty. He's off playing golf and left the sergeant in command. The sergeant does not have the clearance to know about my orders. So when the clearance comes, the orders come in for everybody else, and we were all in the same class together at boot camp, I think a mistake has been made. Okay? They get their orders. I go in with them. There's no orders. I say, well, because my cover orders are in a different location than their orders, but they're not locked up. See, they're just in the temporary outbox. Well, I asked the sergeant, I got no orders. Aren't I going to weather school too? So the sergeant goes and gets those orders and says, oh yeah, here's your orders, and hands them to me to go to weather training school. So I go out and I get on the bus. I got my stuff packed. Now, my drill sergeant had made a very special point. He said, anytime you do anything in the military, keep 2 copies of your orders because you can't trust your officers. Right? Genius, right? I keep 2 copies, right? Okay. So I get in the bus. I'm not on the travel manifest, but I got orders. So what? So they throw me on the airplane and they send me to shoot at Air Force Base, Illinois. If you can't shoot them, chinoot them, that place. Okay. Well, I'm in the base and everybody else is getting paid and I'm at weather school and I'm the best student in the class. And after like 6 weeks, I still haven't been paid. And so I go and I ask the my immediate commander, can I go see, I'm not getting paid. He sends me over to the base payroll offices and they look at their records and they're panicky. You're on this base, and they send me back to weather school. I go back to weather school and 2 MP air policemen and a dog come in and grab me and march me over to the base commander's office. I'm a little terrified, and the base commander says, Airman Hall, if you have a copy of your orders showing you that you're supposed to be on this base, then you're going to be a happy man, and whoever gave you the orders is not going to be very happy. But if you don't have a copy of the orders, the man who gave them to you is going to be a happy man, and you're not going to be a soldier. You're not going to be a very happy soldier because the generals tell me you're too valuable a man to be wasted at this school. I had 2 copies in my wallet. I said, thank you, Sergeant, Master Sergeant Peoples. I graced his hand. I said, you need another one? I can copy this, right? I was a happy man. They said, well, we'll decide what to do, right? So they'd been looking for me at San Angels, Texas for 6 weeks. The FBI had been looking for me at my house in London. Nobody had found me. I go back. And the sergeant comes out and says, you're going to Nellis. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. They gave me the usual wish list when you finish weather school, name 3 places you'd like to go. I said Germany, England, and March Air Force Base, Los Angeles. And they said, no, you're going to Nellis. Okay.
How soon after you're stationed at Nellis do you encounter this abandoned weather station and meet your first tall white?
Well, the first time that I heard tell of the tall whites at Nellis was at my very first duty session at Nellis with another airman, which I describe in my book. Okay, he was the airman that had been on leave for several weeks because he claimed the Nellis weather station was haunted. And it's not the one you see there today. It was the old one that was the northeast end of the base operations building. The base operations building was a very nice building for its day, as was the weather station. I describe it in my book. And it had something very important. It was the military version of an airport terminal. And it had something very important. It had clean restrooms. The next clean restroom was a mile away in a group of barracks they were still building. To get to another clean restroom, you had to go 1.5 miles away, okay? He claimed that when he was working night graveyard, and he had been in its military, he was on his 4th year, that the previous winter, that he thought ghosts, you and I would say, a group of 5 tall white aliens, had come in off the runway, off the tarmac, unlocking the glass doors between the base operations, the interior of the base operations building, the tarmac, because one of the force fields will make every piece of material repel every other piece of material and just pop every lock open. And that when he came in, There was one waiting outside, standing guard, one holding the door open, and then that's two men, and then three women, one holding
Turn
open the
40
door
shit
to
just
the
hurts sometimes when you sleep.
to the bathroom, another one inside, helping them hold open the door to the bathroom, while the third one was using the ladies' restroom, and that they were rotating so that they'd come in to use the restroom. He didn't although he described them doing that, he didn't appreciate what he was describing. He thought they were ghosts. He panicked immediately and started screaming, locked himself in the doorway, and called the base air police, only to discover that the Nellis base commander said no, the air police cannot come beyond the road junction a mile away. He's on his own. Okay? Now, I know from first-hand experience that he was telling the truth, because there came a day when I was working graveyard, actually a whole bunch of days on Sunday night when everything was empty, when that would happen. And the reason that they came is because they're just like us. The bathroom that was a mile down, which the mechanics down in that airport hangar, thought was haunted, was occasionally visited by tall white men who had to go to the bathroom, and it was a mess, never cleaned. Okay? And if you were out with two men and three women who wanted a clean bathroom, and the one a mile and a half down was too far and wasn't suitable, and you said, where do we want to go to the bathroom? You'd say, I know just the place. It's the one in the base ops, and on Sunday night there's nobody around. There's the weather observer, and he's usually sleeping at night like he should. Okay, he's not supposed to, but usually they did. Actually, that was a great place to sleep on. I didn't, but I had too much fun reading books and stuff. And so, and the guy he was my OJT instructor. He also claimed that on a different night, when he was in there, that one of them came and peeked at him around the corner and said, "Don't worry, the women just want to use the restroom." He screamed and called the police again, and they wouldn't come, and he had a nervous breakdown. See, and when that happened to me, I said, "Yeah, don't forget the candy bar machine. You guys may be hungry, right?" And that's what psychological defenses do for you. You see, that's the difference. But that's the first one. He told me the story, but I didn't actually see the tall whites on that night. Then a few nights later, when he had been given an honorable discharge, because the Pentagon insisted that he and I, alone in the warehouse on Sunday night, alone in the weather station together, work at least one duty shift, and then he would be given an honorable discharge of Section 8, which he was. Then when I was with my next duty shift, my next OJT instructor, and he was working a double shift, I was working swing shift. When I left at midnight, and I was trying to hurry to get to the base chow hall, as I was walking back the mile or so to my barracks, one of the new ones being built, when I turned around, following me was the tall white girl, the 12-year-old, and I was about a quarter mile down from the weather station, and back by the white elephant was the teacher and two Rage for Harry and another tall white guard, happily watching me from a distance, and all she was doing was just following me, intentionally showing herself. At the time, when you talk about what good are psychological defenses, at the time, I couldn't believe my eyes, even though they matched what the guy had told me just a few days before. I decided that because I was tired, I must be sleepwalking. And I said, well, gee, I thought if you slept, I didn't realize that you could actually walk and see things when you were sleepwalking. And so I turned and I continued walking. I expected to hurry and get to my barracks before I had a brain stroke or something and collapsed. And I turned around, and after going a few steps, and there she was, she still followed me. And I had been reading a book on the Titanic, which I can talk about later. And in the Titanic, it described a group of angels who came in a craft, landed on one of the lifeboats, and landed on the ledge of one of the icebergs and dropped wreaths for people in the water to use as life preservers, which didn't work. And one of the angels was good at floating out over the water and dropping her hand. And when I turned around and I was just watching her, she smiled. That girl, she lifted up, turned up the power on her suit, lifted up a little bit further till the top of her feet were about as far off the ground as the top, not as top, almost the top of that chair, flew over beside the sidewalk, which was over the grass, and went over the grass a little bit and saw on the grass something that a piece of wrapper or perhaps a quarter or something that interested her, and with her feet still in the air, lowered her shoulders, reached down on the grass and picked it up, assuming the very same position that was described in the book on the Titanic that I had previously read, like that night or 2 nights before, described by the lady in the survivor of the lifeboat that was picked up by the Carpathia, as described in the book that I was reading. And it was like she was the very same girl, and considering that the Tall Whites lived 600, 800 years, 10 times longer than we do,
So hard.
she could have
myself to
been.
work. I'm so
Okay?
tired.
And when I looked at it, I was stunned, and I still didn't make the association between those people and extraterrestrials. That's what psychological defenses do for you. And I decided that I must just be sleepwalking, or there must be something with me mentally. And I went home, and I went back to my barracks, and life continued.
So let's get into the Hall photon theory, because, and just to set this up for the audience, also in the 30s, in 1935, Einstein, Rosen, and Podolsky come up with their sort of spooky action at a distance, entanglement. And it's known as Einstein's dilemma because Einstein had always kind of almost put a governor on reality. The speed limit of reality is the speed of light. And yet, with photons, observably, you see this sort of entanglement effect where various optical properties seem to mirror one another at vast distances just instantaneously. And so how is the Hall photon theory an update on that? And how does that unlock faster than light travel in the form of a spacecraft?
Well, to begin with, I'd like to thank you for this nice interview. And if I don't then be having us on your podcast,
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to congratulate you on just outthinking Einstein. Okay? When you say, what's it feel like to be smarter than Albert Einstein? I say, well, I know a guy. It's not just me, because what you say is correct. And the easiest way to see it is starting with the way Einstein did with the Michelson-Morley experiment of 1897.
Yeah.
Okay? Which was a failure.
Yes.
In 1897, everyone thought that a photon of light had only 2 force fields, an electric field and a magnetic field, that oscillated together, okay?
That ran perpendicular to one another.
And then they did the Michelson-Morley experiment, and then they wanted to interpret it as though it were an experiment that you would do with little boats crossing a river and going up and down in the river, when they didn't know anything about they thought they knew everything there was to know about the photon, that there was only 2 force fields, so they could pretend that they knew everything about how a photon looks like a little boat going across a river. Okay? When the experiment failed, then nobody wanted to say there has to be more structure to the photon than what we know about. Nobody wanted to do that, okay? James Clerk Maxwell had done his equations, and they didn't want to say there's more force fields that Maxwell's equations don't include, but should. Okay, and they oscillate too. They wanted to say we know everything there is to know about the photon. And then they wanted to say, and we know everything about the river and the banks and stuff and the little boats that cross it. So now they'd reasoned themselves into a corner, so why did the experiment fail? And they monkeyed around like that until Einstein, and they finally asked Einstein
But I
what
think
he
of it as a failure to detect the ether, the Michelson-Morley experiments. Is that right? To think
that's
a medium through which
that's
the
what
photons would be carried.
that would make sense, yeah, that there was no ether, but then that left the question, so why isn't there at least some change? Why did the experiment totally fail? Okay. Along the way they ignored things about the experiment. The first one is
Okay, I
that
don't know if I can write
if
anymore.
you
I'm
do the
tired, man. I'm done.
experiment with one
I'll try to go
photon at
again
a
later, but
time in the
I'll have to make
interferometer,
up the words the
you
rest
get
of
the
this week.
same
I'm just
results.
exhausted today. I got
And that means that the photon
1,200
has to be
words.
split in
That's
two
17,
for that to work. Today we call that photon entanglement.
2,300 less than I needed.
But
So I'd
back
have
then
to
they
do
said, well, I don't know, spook you to this.
400 words extra for 8 days. So I'm gonna try to do a 4,000 word sprint starting tomorrow. Then I'm just tired, man. I'm so tired. I didn't get to bed till late. I was up so early. Life sometimes just gets in the way. And anyway, 1,200 words today. That's fine. That's fine. I'm still on. I'll catch it up. All right, I'm out of here. I'll see y'all later. Next stream's tomorrow. Check out my books, From Chef to Crafter to Conqueror. You know what? Let's just do this. Here, check out me. May. Here you go, Gabe Rathwig. From Chef to Crafter Conqueror, I am Gamer. Earth Online, White Soul, Tragic Kingdom. All right, that's me, folks. I am gonna get out of here. I don't see anybody saying anything. Yeah. All right. Good luck. See you tomorrow's, and we're gonna get back at it early in the morning. I'm gonna go sleep early and be out probably maybe 6 or 7 in the morning. All right. Peace.